Iran has sparked an even bigger crisis in the Strait of Hormuz by targeting ships linked to India after allowing passage, and this has put New Delhi facing a tough and unusual choice. Already in the early hours of this Monday, April 20, 2026, the case stopped being just another episode of the regional war and became a direct test of strength, credibility, and response. What happened was simple and serious. Indian vessels tried to cross the route after receiving authorization, but ended up under fire. At the center of this are the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian government, India, and the United States, which continue tightening the blockade and increasing military pressure in the region. Where is this happening? In the most explosive corridor on the planet, between the Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. And why does this matter so much? Because when Iran targets even ships from a nation that had been keeping channels of dialogue open, it shows the world that it can no longer even maintain a clear chain of command. The Indian reaction shows that the situation has crossed a line. Reuters reported that India summoned the Iranian ambassador in New Delhi and expressed deep concern after the attack on two Indian-flagged ships on Saturday. The response began on the diplomatic front, but with a much harsher tone than usual. And here is the central point of this story. When a regime authorizes the crossing and soon after, its own military or forces linked to the security apparatus open fire, the problem is no longer just external aggression, it becomes internal disarray. In practice, the picture that emerges is of a regime that says one thing, does another, and pushes even former channels of tolerance to collapse. That's exactly why the headline makes political sense. The attack on the Indian ships doesn't just lead to diplomatic protest. It opens the door to something that until recently seemed unlikely, a much more assertive Indian stance in defending navigation, energy security, and its strategic presence at sea. There is still no open confirmation of a large-scale Indian military action, and this needs to be stated clearly. But the growing perception is that New Delhi has already been forced. When India urgently summons the Iranian envoy, toughens its rhetoric, and monitors a vital route. Under attack, the message is that the cost of continuing to tolerate Iranian improvisation has become too high. This is the stance that no one expected to gain traction so soon. At the same time, the United States continues to increase the pressure, and this changes the whole gravity of the crisis. Washington confirmed the seizure of an Iranian cargo ship that, according to the Americans, was trying to break the blockade. The ceasefire has once again entered a danger zone, and Tehran has already said it does not want to take part in new talks while the blockade continues. And why is that? Because Iran is trying to use Hormuz as leverage, while the United States sees this as maritime blackmail that needs to be crushed before it becomes normalized. Another decisive point is that this episode reinforces the suspicion of a split within the Iranian system itself. It points to a war of narratives between negotiators, the military apparatus, and hardline voices of the regime, with signs that one side is talking about easing restrictions on the route, while the other is acting to shut everything down by force. This public contradiction between authorizing passage and then attacking vessels, combined with Iran's refusal to confirm participation in the new negotiations, feeds exactly this perception. Iran seems trapped between factions, internal fear, and radicalization. And a regime that, divided at this level of war, tends to be more dangerous because it reacts without coherence. On the military front, the stakes are also rising. Reuters had already reported the presence of the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln in the area, and weeks later recorded that the Gerald Ford operated in the theater of war. While the George H.W. Bush was considered to replace the Ford after problems on board, with more naval assets, more logistical support, and the ceasefire nearing its end, Washington may come back even stronger than before. The United States is not reducing pressure, they are accumulating options. And that explains why the attack on Indian ships is so serious. It happens precisely when the margin for Iranian error is smaller than ever. In the end, the answer to the central questions becomes clear throughout this crisis. What happened was an Iranian attack on Indian vessels right in the most sensitive route on the planet. The Revolutionary Guard itself is what set off the political firestorm by turning a cleared passage into a trap. How? With confusing orders, blockade, intimidation, and shots fired at civilian ships. And why? Because the Iranian regime tries to survive by spreading fear at sea while facing external pressure and signs of internal erosion. But this move could backfire. By attacking Indian ships, Tehran not only escalates the crisis with a major Asian nation, it helps push India, the United States, and other players toward a firmer, more coordinated, and much more dangerous response for the regime itself.